How's it going, PD team? I've got an important video for you today, essentially fixing several issues with the Redshift texture node. When you're not tiling your textures, you'll run into a series of problems. This video will address and solve scaling, position offset, rotation, and alignment. When you're done with this tutorial, you'll definitely want to save this node as a preset in your library for later use. This tutorial is an extension of Quick Tips 003 installment with lots of added features, deeper explanation, and examples, expanding the capability of your simple scaling node that we had created. This solution is somewhat complicated, so grab a coffee or a tea and get ready. With that being said, let's dive in. So here's the working example of the node we're about to create. You can see here's the controls I pulled out. If I set the scale to 0.25 or 25%, we scale it and then it goes into the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. We have offset controls, we have rotation, and the alignment. So right now it's justified, and this is how the default tiling would work, but we've got a drop down now where we can say centered, and now it centers from the middle point. So if I put this back to 0 and put the alignment to justified where it's in the corner, you'll see that it rotates around the center axis. So that can be a little bit confusing. So we have the default justified setting, but we can also do centered. And then we also have an offset that we can actually add to that center point. So let's go ahead and build this out. Once we're done with this project, you're gonna have a nice tidy node that will control your texture node. So it'll be encapsulating all the functionality inside a group that we've called texture transform. You can drag it in from your library, connect it to scale, offset, and rotate, and get going. Okay, so for this example, I've basically set up a standard material. I've removed the reflection, loaded up a texture, and I've added it into the color channel and the emission channel, and set the emission channel up a little bit so that we have some lighting on the texture because I'm not using lights. I want a simple scene for making this node. Next step, we're gonna scroll down to the bottom of the texture node, and we're gonna bring in, by control clicking, the scale, the offset, and the rotation. So we have inputs. Next, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna right click and say empty group, give it a name. I called mine PD texture transform. We don't need the preview, so disable that. And then we're gonna take our scale and drag it into the node, drag the offset, say add to new input, and rotation as well, add to new input. Give it a color. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna go inside. So double click, and you can see here's our outputs, scale, offset, and rotate. So first what we wanna tackle is the scaling. So this is from Quick Tips 003, so it should look very similar. So what we're gonna do is we want scale to not be tiles. Our texture tag, when we hit scale, if I disable this, is set to 1. But if I bring this to 4, it's 25%. So I want to change this to percentage values, not tiling amounts. I've turned off the wrap feature. So let's go back inside. So we know that we're dealing with whole numbers. So what we want to do is we want to take and change that from 4 to 25%. So to do that, we need to split off the scale because we have two values. So to do that, I'm going to use the vector to scalar. And what this is going to do is this is going to split off our properties into individual values. So our input we're going to enter in will look like this. We'll put 25 and 25. Ignore the third value because we're not going to be using Z depth. Then what we want to do is we want to use a div node, which is the divider node, 1. So we want to do 1 divided by 0.25 will give us 4. So I'll take this, duplicate it, go for the X. So make sure you're plugging it into the second value. So it's 1 divided by our input value, which will give us a whole number. So next what we want to do is we want to plug these back in and merge them back into a vector. So we'll do vector maker. So we're going to make a vector from these two values. And there we go. So now we plug it into the scale, and then we take this, plug this in to new input, and we'll call this one scale. And I'm just double clicking. And then it disappears. So what we need to do is we need to plug in our div. We need to set to 1, the first value to 1, and then everything should look normal. Then what we're going to do is we're going to try out our texture scale. So we'll set this to 0.25, and there you go. We're now 25%. So 4 tiles should fit on the width and the height. Go back inside, and now this is done and complete. So scale is finished. So next what we're going to do is we're going to talk about offset and getting this tile to be in the center. I've got a great example for you to check out. So let's take a look. Okay, so here in this example, we've got a canvas. This is representing our workspace for the tile. So the upper left-hand corner is 0, middle is 0.5, and the bottom right is going to be 1. So when we take a texture and we scale it to 4, what it's doing is it's taking that and dividing it by 4 times and tiling it 4 down and 4 across. What we did is we changed that 4 to 0.25, which is 25%. Now what we want to do is we want to get the tile to be centered. So we know the center of the canvas is 0.5. So if we set the offset to 0.5, the tile will be in the upper left-hand corner of the center point. So we're almost there. Next, what we're going to do is we've got to find the width of our tile that's been scaled down, 0.25, and we're going to take the width of this, which is half of that because our center point is here on the texture. So we divide that by 2 and we get 125. So we need to store that value. And then what we're going to do to center it is we're going to take the half of our canvas, 0.5, and subtract it by the width of the tile, which is 0.125. And that will give us a value of 0.375. That 0.375 that gets calculated for us will then center the offset to make the tile centered. So let's go back into Cinema 4D and build this algorithm out. So I'm going to move this up to give us some space. First, what we want to do is we want to get the scale that we set, which was 0.25, and we want to divide that by 2. Now, we're going to be working with vectors, so make sure that you set it to all the nodes we're going to create are going to be vector versions of our nodes. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here, plug in our scale, and we want to divide it by 2. So I'll put 2 and 2. That's going to get us the middle point of this tile. So right here. So we scaled it down to 25%. Let's get half of that, which is going to be right where the O is. And then what we want to do is we want to subtract that from right here, which is 0.5 to get it to center. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and add a value node, change it to vector, and set this to 0.5 and 0.5. I'm going to rename this 0.5. So this is our stage. We want to take the vector division and the center, which is 0.5, and subtract it from each other. So I'm going to do subtract, and make sure you pick vector subtract. We're going to take our canvas width, plug it in, and then subtract it from the vector scale that we just created. Okay, so next what we want to do is we want to fix the offset, because if we put a value in here, it's going to go in the negative direction and go off the stage of our texture. So what we need to do is we need to invert the values. So to do that, we can just take and add a multiply node, vector multiply, and multiply it by negative value, -1. So we'll plug this in and we'll put -1 in both slots. And now we've got an inverted value, and when we can plug it into offset, and then you'll see your texture centers perfectly. So now we're done with offset. So now I can go out of my texture node and change this to 0.5 and 0.5, and you'll see our texture now scales from this middle location, 0.25. Okay, so that's working. Now let's address the rotation. So with rotation, the texture tag, if I disable this, one thing that you're gonna run into if I just plug this into rotate is when I select this, the rotation shows us that it goes to 360 degrees in the positive and the negative. But this value, if we were to just bring this in and put a rotation, degree rotation on it, it's actually not degrees of rotation. It's being converted inside here for us. This is actually using radians. So let's go ahead and preemptively fix that. So what you want to do is go to Google and search radians to degrees, and you'll see that 1 radian is this value. So I'm going to select these numbers up to the 4th digit, copy it, add a multiply node, and we want to take the rotation value that we're going to plug in and multiply it by that 1 radian degree. So paste, enter, and now we plug this in to rotate. I'm going to rename this from multiply node to degrees to radians. Go out, and you'll notice it spins pretty crazily. When we update the UI and design our UI, we'll address that, but we'll just leave that how it is for now. You don't need the inputs. Now let's clean up our nodes.
Whoa, hold on a second. So you made it this far. Clearly, you're enjoying the content. Would you consider clicking the thanks button on this video to help grow the channel's community so I can make more great content just for you? Any amount is greatly appreciated. If money is tight right now, then do me a favor and just smash that like button immediately. Now, back to the video.
So I'm going to take and add, holding Control and Shift, clicking and adding a rerouter, bring this down to give us some more space. So next what we want to do is we want to be able to input an offset value. So yes, it's centered, but I want to be able to offset this value. So we're going to be able to override these nodes by doing a subtraction. So I'm going to add a subtract node. Make sure you do the vector subtract, call this offset, and we'll add a value node and call this offset. And the user input values, I like coloring them red, so I'll make it red. And this offset value, we want to set to a vector. So this is what the user is going to plug in. So we're going to take our output of our multiply invert value, plug it into input of our offset, and then plug in our offset node inside and bring it into the offset. So let's try this out. You can see I can plug in a value, positive value, and it goes the correct way. So positive numbers move to the right, negative go to the other direction. So this is working perfectly. Next, what I want to do is I want the user to be able to basically select in a dropdown what alignment feature that they want. So to do that is actually a pretty cool technique. So the shader switch is not just a shader switch. So if I do shader switch, the shader switch is actually a lie. It can also be used as a switch statement in JavaScript programming where you plug in a number and it can pick between each of these values. So even though we're showing colors here, they can be values as well. So what we can do is we're going to add our first value into shader 1 or 0, and this is going to be the center alignment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a value node, and I'm going to rename this switch, give it a color of red, and this is a switch that people are going to be able to check. So if I go to the switch here, click the drop down, we're going to select bool. And so what this bool is going to do is it's going to switch between the center alignment and the justified. So what we're going to need to do though is we're going to need another offset, and we're going to take our offset, plug it in to here, and we're doing the second value, and we want to reset it. So we're going to leave the first value as 0. So 0 is going to put it in the corner, and then we're going to use the offset to offset that value. So I'm going to add it to shader 1 and then plug in my Boolean. And what Boolean is going to do is going to it, because it's a 0 or 1, it's going to either play this one or play this one, shader 0 or shader 1. And then we need to plug in our out color into offset. So now let's try the Boolean. You can see it's offset, but it's justified from the corner. So if I go to here, set it to 0, there we go. So our switch is now working. So unchecked and checked. And what we can do is we can invert these so I can switch. So with the Boolean checked, it centers, unchecked, it's justified. There we go. So that's our switch. So we can go here, drag our switch in, add new input. I'm going to rename switch to alignment. And next what we want to do is we want to plug in this offset and make it available to a user. So I'm going to drag this out, add new input, we'll leave it offset. I'm going to change the order. And I actually like having offset the second value. So scale, offset, rotate, and alignment. And there we go. And we can try this out. So that's working. And then we can check this and it works. So let's go ahead and tidy this up. As you can see, I went in and added reroute nodes, cleaned it up, separated them a little bit, snapped them to the grid. Let's go ahead and build out the UI. So the first step, I like getting rid of these inputs because we're not going to be using inputs on our texture transform node. And with it selected, here's our UI that's set up right now. I want to change this to percentage values, and same with this. And I want this rotation to work properly and be a degree of rotation. And I want to change this alignment to be a drop down. Okay, so to change the UI, what we're going to do is we're going to right click, go to edit resource. We get this scary box here with lots of settings. We're going to start off with our inputs. So ignore the outputs. We don't want to touch that. So these inputs are what the user is going to select in the UI. So we go to scale, and we need to set this to a 2D vector. We don't need 3 inputs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and say 2D vector, and we want to change this to percentage values. So I'm going to change it to percent, set our default to 100% in each box here, and we'll set our step to 1 and 1%, hit enter. So there's our first value. So if you need finer controls, you can set this to 0.1. So if I do 0.1 and 0.1, we'll get smaller detailed scaling. Next with offset, we want to do the same. We want to change it to a 2D vector. So go to vector 2D, and same with this, we'll want to do percent. We'll leave the default value at 0 because we don't want to offset it by default, and we'll set this to 0.1 as well. Next, what we'll do is we'll start with rotation. The units, we're going to do a degree, and we'll say step. We'll have it go in 1 degree rotation, default value set to 0. And our value limits, we'll do negative 360 and positive 360. And our slider, we'll have neg 360, positive 360. Hit enter, and there's our slider. Next, what we'll do is we'll do the alignment. Now this one is tricky because we're not going to be using the Boolean. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the integer because our bool is also an integer, 0 and 1. So if I go to integer, I can now change this from numeric field to drop down. And then what we do is we put what we want this to say. The first value is center. So I'll put center, and then we put a colon, which is the 2 dots, and then the value, which is 0. Hit enter, and we'll just say justify, which is the default, and we'll set this to 1. So our bool is going from 0 and 1, from center to justified. Now make sure you don't put a semicolon between these values. It's the 2 dots, and our default value will have it to here, and we're good to go. So you can see here's our alignment set to center and justify. So let's try this out. So I'm running the IPR window. We can set this to 0.5 or 50%. We can try the offset. There we go. And then rotation should work. So if I go all the way around, you can see we got 360 counterclockwise, negative values, works perfectly. Next, we can try the justify alignment tool. So we'll click here to center and to justified. So these are flipped. So I have 2 options. The easiest option to fix this is to just right click, edit resource, go to our alignment, and change these values from 0 and 1 to 1 and 0. And that will just flip the values. So now you can see it's justified and center. There we go. Next, save a copy of this. So what you can do is you can command click, control drag, and then go here to asset and say convert to asset. This will store it in your library for later use. And then you can save this project in case you need to re-edit it. You'll have the original node to play with. That's it for this tutorial. I hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on more content. Thanks for your support.